Welcome to CharityVillage Connects. I'm Mary Barrell. The 2024 Giving Report by Canada Helps shows that for the 11th straight year, the number of Canadians giving to charity has declined again. The decline, coupled by alarming challenges facing the nonprofit sector, including unprecedented demand for services, falling donations, staff burnout, and rising inflation, has proven difficult to stop, much less reverse. What's causing this decline in giving? And more importantly, what can we do about it? To help us better understand the gravity of the current situation facing Canadian nonprofits and to explore potential solutions, please welcome Julie Fiorini, the General Manager, Donor Services and Brand Marketing for Canada Helps. Julie is a strategic and purpose-driven leader who's passionate about connecting people in a meaningful way to the causes they support. In her role at Canada Helps, Julie brings a diverse background in marketing, communications, and fundraising to support Canadians on their philanthropic journey and drive much-needed donations to charities that are working every day to make our world better. Welcome to the podcast, Julie.
Thank you so much for having me, Mary. It's great to be here.
Well, let's start with some background. I wonder if you could give us some insight into the inception of the Giving Report. And when was the report first released, and you've followed up year after year? What's the basis of the study? Why did this begin?
Sure. Great first question. So Canada Helps has actually been producing the Giving Report since 2017. So it started in 2017, which makes this year's report the 7th edition. And for those who don't know or aren't familiar with Canada Helps has been Canada's largest online donation and fundraising platform since 2000. So Canada Helps has been around now for 24 years and provides a very safe and trusted destination for folks who want to discover and support any charity in Canada. And at the same time, we also support the charitable sector by providing really affordable fundraising solutions to charities across the country. And just to plug Canada Helps with one more very amazing stat, since 2000, over 4.6 million people have donated on Canada Helps, and we just recently surpassed our $3 billion milestone. So it's very exciting. Back to your original question, Mary, though, about the Giving Report. So this is our 7th edition. And for those who would like to donate, to download a copy, you can do so at CanadaHelps.org. And the report has really been a cornerstone piece of information for the charitable sector. I can tell you, I've been in the charitable sector now for cumulatively over 15 years, and I have personally relied on the data and the information that the Giving Report has provided over the last 7 years. And it has been really a robust report on the state of the nation in the sector. And not only that, we have developed it in partnership with Environics Analytics as well as Imagine Canada, which are two other leading providers of data in the sector. So it provides a lot of information, not just on Canada Helps vast transactional data, but other data sources that really paint a picture of the charitable sector.
There's no doubt that the Giving Report has really become the go-to kind of resource for professionals who are working in the nonprofit sector to learn more about the state of the union, as you say, regarding the Canadian nonprofit sector. What did this year's Giving Report reveal about the health of the Canadian giving landscape, specifically in relation to the impacts of the report references climate change and other rather complex crises in addressing some of the highlights or the key findings in the report?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the key findings from the report and from the data is that fewer Canadians are giving. And we've been seeing this alarming trend for a number of years now. What we've taken away, though, what's different this year is that the report is really highlighting the fact that Canadians have become increasingly disconnected. And this started obviously before the pandemic, but the pandemic and the social isolation caused by that definitely perpetuated that. And so what we are actually seeing now is that with that social disconnection and shrinking social networks, we are seeing now that that is directly correlated with lower rates of giving, which is very concerning. And so as we're looking at the fact that fewer Canadians are giving, we're also seeing that with charities, they are facing heightening demand, which was exacerbated by the pandemic. And many Canadians, in fact, are turning to charities for essential services now, some of whom are doing that for the very first time. Essential services like food and shelter, which is also deeply concerning. And to your point, Mary, about climate change, what we specifically wanted to delve into with this report is sort of the disconnect between what Canadians say and what they claim to be concerned about versus what they do. And so we really dove into climate change as an existential issue, which many Canadians self-report to be very concerned about. And in fact, what we're seeing, though, is that that is not translating into donations for charities that directly support environmental causes.
So I gather it's a sense of powerlessness or perhaps hopelessness in terms of feeling that they can actually make an impact in such critical issues that are facing us. Is that sort of what I'm hearing?
That's definitely part of it. I think that, well, I'm not a psychologist, so I can't get into the psychology behind, what compels people to give at a philanthropic level. But there's definitely a sense that why bother if we're not making an impact, if we can't make a difference? And so I think it's really imperative for those of us in the charitable sector to really lean into that and try to reverse the trend of fewer Canadians giving by making sure we promote and cultivate community connections, promote engagement, and ensure that all of us, all Canadians, can thrive and live in healthy communities.
Well, I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into the key findings from the report, which again is very robust. To start, the number of donations continues to decline year over year, while demand for services is as you say, at an all-time high. And over half of the charities are unable to meet current levels of demand. Could you expand on these findings and share some insights into the implications for the sector given these circumstances?
For sure. And just to clarify, the number of Canadians who actually report taxable donations on their income tax returns, that continues to go down. So we, as we produce the giving report, Canada Helps looks at Canada Revenue Agency or CRA tax filer data, which is an important source of our information around charitable giving. And so now for 11 consecutive years, we are seeing the trend that fewer Canadians are giving. And in terms of what those donation rates look like, in 2010, the total percentage of Canadians who did claim tax receipts on their annual income tax return was 23.4%, so roughly 1 in 4. And now the latest round of tax filer data, which is 2021, by the way, so it's never quite up to date. So we're always a little bit behind when we look at CRA data. In 2021, that percentage of Canadians that are giving has gone down to 17.7%. So you can see that the decline continues. And the giving report actually shows what that decline has been over the last 11 years. At the same time, Canada Helps did some proprietary research, and outside of that CRA tax filer data, when we asked Canadians about their giving participation in a study that we conducted specifically for this giving report, findings actually revealed that giving participation dropped from 82% in 2013 to 60% in 2023. So we actually asked the question, are you giving? Are you giving to charities? And so just to reiterate, in 2013, self-reported data was 82%, and we're now down to 60%. I do just want to say, though, while fewer Canadians appear to be giving, the bright spot in all of this continues to be online giving. And so, CanadaHelps.org, as I mentioned at the top, has been a safe and trusted destination to make online gifts for 24 years. And so what we're seeing in the 5-year period between 2019 and 2023, and that is pandemic period, donations through Canada Helps almost doubled. So that is exponential growth that we can't ignore. And the other really bright spot is monthly giving. I think that charities have done a superb job communicating and conveying their case for support and the integral need for a sustainable source of revenue. And nothing is better, quite frankly, for charities than monthly donors. It's their bread and butter, as we like to say in the sector. And so monthly giving has grown and increased by 11%. So that's a really positive sign. And the other bright spot too is donations of securities. That continues to increase rapidly, rising by 32% in 2023.
Well, I'm glad that you're balancing some of this really alarming trends that we're seeing with the more positive things that we've also seen developed. I'd like to sort of dig into the online giving that you've noted. Certainly, Canada Helps would be in the perfect position to actually witness this in terms of the kind of work that you do day to day. Could you explain, based on the online giving index, what is the state of online giving in Canada generally beyond your numbers? How has the index fluctuated year over year?
Yes, so the Online Giving Index is actually an index that Canada Helps created as part of its data compilation of the Giving Report. And it's now turned out to be a leading indicator within the charitable sector that really gives real-time insights into the state of online charitable giving. And so it's derived from the contributions of nearly 1 million Canadians who have donated through the Canada Helps platform annually. So suffice to say that the Online Giving Index, or OGI as we say, the acronym is, it is a reliable predictor of sort of the official figures that the CRA reports. And as I mentioned, we're always in this 2-year lag with CRA. So even though we're in 2024, we're actually just seeing 2021 data. So the Online Giving Index is actually a more accurate predictor of giving. And of course, with the pandemic in 2020, that initial sort of explosion of online donations, which happened as a direct response of people understanding the gravity of the situation and how charities, especially those on the front lines, were under immense pressure to deal with all the things the pandemic threw at us. That drove the Online Giving Index, or OGI, to an unprecedented average of 135. And it dipped just slightly the next year in 2021 to 126. And again, this makes much more sense when you're actually looking at the report. So I apologize for throwing out all these numbers throughout this conversation. So in 2022 and 2023, when things sort of like stabilized and got back to almost pre-pandemic levels, the average online giving index was 83. So that was a bit of a deceleration in online giving growth. And it's remains to be seen if that is going to be, attributed to just getting back to normal, quote unquote, or if it reflects a major decline in giving. I think we sort of have to see a couple more years of data to really, make the call on that one. But there's no question that in the last couple of years, so between 2022 and 2023, there has been a dip in the percentage of donors who give through Canada Helps. So in 2022, there were about 922,000 donors on Canada Helps. And then in 2023, it went down 9% to about 839,000. So total donations have declined on Canada Helps as well.
Yeah, that really is disturbing. And right now, of course, although we won't see that in the CRA data yet, but current economic pressures have obviously detrimentally impacted the ability of many Canadians to donate to charities, starting in 2023 and continuing into 2024. What are other factors that are contributing to the downward trend in giving rates, do you think?
There's no question, the financial strain, which has been exacerbated by inflation and economic uncertainty, has definitely been a contributing factor to the decline in charitable giving. I think the latest report on the inflation rate for March is that it's up again in Canada, and there's no question that when people are faced with increasing prices of everything, like gasoline overnight went up by 14 cents a liter. It's unbelievable to even conceptualize that. And there's no doubt that that has been a contributing factor in what people are able to, allocate their discretionary income towards. And so if you're making a choice between having to buy groceries, having to fill up your car with gas to get to the job that you need to get to every day in order to put groceries on the table and pay your rent, of course, all of these essentials are going to be covered first before you even contemplate making gifts to charity. So there's no question that that's an enormous factor. We actually, in some of the research we've done, we've actually heard that under about 45% of those who have stopped donating to charity over the last 3 years have cited financial constraints as the primary barrier. So that's a clear indication that for many Canadians, the willingness to give, the desire to give to charity is truly overshadowed by the practicality of their personal and individual economic situations. And to just go back to sort of the charities that are addressing or trying to address climate change and the environment, in the report, we cite the lack of clarity around the impact of charitable donations. So 20% of former donors who contributed to charities that address or are attempting to address climate change and the environment, 20% are saying that they have stopped giving because they doubted the effectiveness of their gifts, followed by not being asked to donate again, which we're hearing a lot. I think we've all heard in the sector that one of the main reasons why people give to charity is because they were asked. So that's still a very important thing to keep in mind when you're trying to come up with your giving in your marketing plan for the year. So while these stats are specific to environment charities, I think we can sort of extrapolate it to all charities and the importance of always demonstrating what the impact is, where the money is going, where the dollars are going, what are those key projects that have been able to successfully get underway or get completed as a result of, donations flowing in. So I think it's critical for charities to be able to consistently demonstrate impact. Another thing I just want to touch on too is something that you hear about a lot, and that is the diminishing engagement of younger Canadians in charitable giving versus previous generations, which presents a significant concern for the future of charities, which, as we know, have become increasingly reliant on older donors. And the reality is, we need to, every charity needs to think about how engagement with younger generations will manifest, because not all charities out there are doing events that they can invite, people to in person. Not all charities are active on social media. So I think it's important for every charity out there to sort of, reflect and see what that means to them as an organization, because it's definitely not a one size fits all. And
Right.
the other,
And sorry, go ahead.
sorry, Mary, the other thing I was going to say, which is also actually quite important too, is declining religiosity, which emerges as a factor that is possibly contributing to the decrease in charitable giving rates. With the stat being that individuals who do not attend religious services are 14 percentage points less likely to donate to charity. So 71% versus 57%.
I'd like to go back to what we discussed earlier on when we first began discussing these very important topics. And you mentioned that the report had highlighted the impact of disconnection between people and how that is impacting and disconnecting people from the charitable sector as well. Could you share some of the insights into the impacts of disconnectedness among Canadians?
Yes, there absolutely appears to be a correlation, a direct correlation between Canadians who have smaller social support systems or smaller social networks and their propensity to donate and volunteer with charities. And this is happening while social networks are shrinking overall. And this was happening pre-pandemic and, of course, exacerbated during the pandemic. And now we continue to see more shrinking social networks. And just a caveat, when I say social networks, I'm not talking about the number of friends people have on Facebook or the number of followers on Instagram or TikTok. I'm actually referring to the support systems and actual networks people have in their day-to-day lives, their family, their friends, their neighbors, their work colleagues, all of whom make up their real social network and connections. And so what we're seeing is a very concerning trend that the number of Canadians who self-reported having 6 or more close friends has actually declined 40% from 2013 to 2022. So in 2013, 37% of Canadians reported having 6 or more friends within their network. And now in 2022, that's down to 22% of Canadians having a social network of 6 or more friends. And of those people who report having many close friends, or at least 6 or more, more than 80% of them actually claim that they donate to charity, whereas those with fewer close friends are donating to charity. And so the correlation then is obvious, that those who have strong social connections, who have a strong sense of belonging to their community, actually want to be active participants in making their community, the world at large, a better place, to use the cliche, and actually want to support charities that are out there doing some of the most important work and trying to solve some of the most pressing issues that we have in the world today.
That's just really fascinating insights, and it certainly makes sense. And with the pandemic even increasing the isolation of people during lockdowns, one can only imagine that those networks have even shrunk even more. I'd like to sort of go back to the topic of the impact of economics on the giving behavior of Canadians, but also the impact of, with the housing and food affordability crisis worsening, um, the number of Canadians accessing charitable services to meet essential needs have truly soared. And you talked about that. And I guess the other piece of that is that the inflationary pressures that everyone is facing in Canada would also be impacting the charities and their operations in terms of being able to provide services to these increased demands that they're facing. I wonder if you could provide some insights into the factors affecting charities and related to these challenges, and how that can impede their ability to prepare for and address future crises for them, and what might happen to society in general should we face another pandemic or some other sort of unexpected event that could impact Canadian society.
We truly are currently facing that proverbial double-edged sword. So on the one hand, we've got fewer Canadians who are giving to charity. And on the other hand, as we mentioned, as I mentioned earlier, so many Canadians are now turning to charities for assistance for just basic needs. Some of whom are turning to charities for the first time ever in their life because they actually have nowhere else to turn. And CanadaHelps actually commissioned a survey with Ipsos last fall. So that was fall of 2023, where the stats showed 1 in 5 Canadians were currently using charitable services to meet those essential needs. And as I mentioned, almost 7 in 10, so 69%, said that this was the first time that they had to turn to charity for support to help them meet those essential needs. And at the same time, that research also showed, when we asked charities how they were able to keep pace, or if they were able to keep pace with this unprecedented demand, more than half of them, 57% of them, said they actually are unable to meet current levels of demand, which really speaks to the gap between the growing challenges charities face and their ability to provide support. And so, to your question, Mary, around what does this mean for charities and the challenges they face, and how are they going to be able to prepare for and address future crises? It really, I mean, it's a multifaceted response, but at the gist of it is getting to the heart of that disconnectedness and disconnection that Canadians are feeling is truly what we have to try and address, not just as the charitable sector, but society at large. It really is all of our collective responsibility to try and get ourselves back on track, to make people, if I can be blunt, actually give a damn again about the world, their communities, how we exist in this world, and how we continue to support each other and support the most vulnerable amongst us. It really is going to be a critical challenge that many charities face. We're absolutely seeing that now with the arts sector in particular, who is struggling because it's very challenging in this climate with the financial strain on everyone to justify supporting charities, supporting arts-based events that just seem to be more of a nice to have versus a need to have. And so getting to the heart of that disconnection and trying to re-engage Canadians, make them understand that the impact they can have will make a difference on them and the communities at large. Like, it's something we have to all try and address together.
The report, interestingly, I guess, used climate crises, uh, climate change issues, and the charities that advocate for addressing the issues that are created by climate change, as almost an example that I assume we can effectively look at as a representative of how people are feeling about charities at large. And I'd like to go back to that because your report found that climate action is at the forefront of Canadians' minds. It's in the news, in the headlines every day. But according to the Giving Report, they're not acting on their commitments, or at least they're not acting on their understanding of the impacts of climate change. Why is this, and what recommendations do you or the data that you found have provided for, I guess, activating collective action?
Yes, the gap, I think I mentioned it earlier, the gap between what Canadians say is important to them and the action that they take as a result continues to widen. And I think when we look at charities that are supporting the environment or trying to address climate change, only 1.5% of donations that are made through Canada Helps are actually directed to environmental charities, despite the fact that 1 in 3 Canadians self-reported that climate change or protecting the environment is a top cause for them. So there's clearly a disconnect there. And almost half of Canadians have expressed anxiety about climate change on at least somewhat of a regular basis. And we're seeing that especially with younger generations, millennials and Gen Z, for sure. I think for charities, it's, again, I will go back to the importance of demonstrating impact and really telling the crisis story. As a matter of fact, yesterday, Canada Helps, we had a launch event of this year's Giving Report. Mary, you were there. Thank you for joining us. And what was interesting is that I was chatting with a representative from one of the environmental charities who attended, and I won't mention who that was, but we were talking about, what the response has been sort of post-pandemic to their campaigns around climate change. And interestingly, what they said was that they are having the most success when they sort of convey the crisis story or the doom and gloom versus when they talk about what successes they've had with specific projects. So I think in this particular case, and I'm not going to suggest that everybody has to do this, but if the work that you're doing as a charity is, impacted by climate or other crises, it definitely has to be incorporated into your communications, into your case for support and, ongoing solicitation requests. Canadians need to be kept aware of, the full picture and scope of crises like climate change, and they can be used as powerful motivators for giving and for long-term engagement and activism if it's done correctly.
The Giving Report also identified cultivating communities as a key strategy to strengthening the bond between organizations and potential donors. We talked about that disconnection that has to be overcome. Could you share some of the benefits of fostering community and how a nonprofit or charity might think of ways that they could actually do it effectively?
Yes, I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, like every charity is unique and different in terms of how much they can engage, whether it's an at an in-person level with their constituents or virtually. And so that's sort of like self-reflection needs to take place at each organization to determine what works for them. And we also can't do, a lot of navel gazing here to suggest that charities are going to solve the issue of helping Canadians rebuild social connections. Like, that's not going to be something that our sector is going to solve in its entirety, but we can certainly help with cultivating that sense of community around their cause areas specifically. So, fostering connections and community involvement to strengthen, that bond that exists between your current supporters and your prospective or potential supporters, that's really critical for all charities to do. And if you have in-person events that you do, whether they're fundraising events or more sort of informal events like tours of your facility or, special donor stewardship events, they don't have to be major events, and they certainly don't have to only be fundraising events. But any opportunity where you can actually have some face-to-face in-person connections, those are invaluable. And those are the types of initiatives that unite people and really emphasize the community's role and the importance in driving change.
I always like to end interviews of this nature with looking at potential solutions. What are some of the other key strategies and tactics that organizations need to invest in during these really challenging times? How can we move forward toward collective action and be more effective in being able to strengthen the work that we're doing for our respective causes and building a more resilient nonprofit sector?
Well, to start, please download the 2024 Giving Report available at CanadaHelps.org, because there are several takeaways at the back of the report that address the question you just asked, Mary. And so the first thing, which I'll reiterate, and I've already said a couple of times, every charity needs to communicate their impact very clearly. For charities across causes, not just climate change, which we've been focusing on today in this discussion, but all causes, they need to ensure that they highlight not just the needs that your organization is addressing, but also like the current needs the organization is addressing, but also the progress and the achievements made that would only be possible and have only been made possible by donations through the generosity of their current supporter base. Using really compelling storytelling, data is very important, and impactful visuals. That will make your impact tangible and meaningful to supporters. And even something as this is sort of like a very small tweak, but many organizations will produce an annual report. I would really strongly encourage those listening on the call from charities to consider shifting the name of their annual report to an impact report. Like, just that small tweak is sort of like, again, like that whole psychological factor. And so that's one thing they can do. The other thing is to emphasize non-monetary ways to support your organization. As we're seeing, financial donations and those who have the ability to give with monetary gifts, there's a lot of folks struggling right now. So we need to encourage them to support the organization in different ways, whether they can volunteer, whether they can be advocates, for example, with specific causes, or even sharing expertise, like volunteering as a mentor, for example. That would be invaluable. And that really helps a charity grow their supporter base, not necessarily in the monetary way, but in the way that they will build up their total sort of constituent base that eventually one day may have the capacity to give financially. So you have to constantly cultivate relationships with your supporters and get them engaged in other ways beyond just transactional. And the other thing I would just share as a suggestion is, although I mentioned the individual I spoke with yesterday mentioned how they're really leaning into some of that negative doom and gloom messaging, which seems to be more successful than the positive messaging these days. I would say showcasing success and positive outcomes, that's also very important, because it also inspires action. People inherently want to feel like they're contributing to something positive, that they are helping to do something meaningful, which will ultimately make things better for themselves and the community at large. And so giving people a sense of hope and possibility by sharing those positive outcomes is really important. And so potential supporters in particular want to see that their gift, if they choose to make one, is going to make a difference.
Well, thank you, Julie, for sharing your sage advice. Very appropriate and I think timely advice. And the key insights of the 2024 Canada Helps Giving Report. They're sure to be enormously helpful to nonprofits across Canada to navigate these truly challenging times. Thank you for joining us on Charity Village Connects.
Thank you so much for having me, Mary.